She didn't know the job would cost her everything. Nia Holloway thought she'd finally made it. Corner office access, a six-figure salary, the most powerful family in New York City trusting her with their secrets. She thought she was chosen because she was brilliant. She was right, but not for the reason she believed. By the time she discovered the truth, her name was already on the documents. Her fingerprints were on the accounts. And two women who sat in her exact chair before her had simply vanished. If you've ever been used by someone you trusted completely, stay with me. Like this video, drop your city in the comments, and let's see how far Nia's story travels. The alarm went off at 4:47 in the morning, 13 minutes before it was supposed to, and Nia Holloway lay still in the dark, listening to it scream like it knew something she didn't. She didn't move right away. She never did. There was a ritual to mornings in her Flatbush apartment, the radiator clanking, the upstairs neighbor dragging something heavy across the floor, the distant sound of a bus exhaling at the corner of Nostrand and Linden. These were the sounds that had anchored her entire life. The sounds of a woman who worked twice as hard for half the credit and was used to it, though she'd never in her life admit that out loud. She was 34 years old. She had a master's degree from Fordham, 8 years of executive assistant experience across 3 different industries, and a reputation that preceded her into every room she entered. She was also, as her last employer had once said under his breath, at a company gala, not realizing she was 3 feet behind him, a lot to take in. He meant her size. He always meant her size. She'd smiled at him the next morning like nothing happened, finished his quarterly reports with 0 errors, and updated her resume that same night. That was Nia. She didn't explode. She documented. She sat up, pressed both palms into the mattress, and breathed through her nose once before standing. The bathroom mirror was honest and unkind, the way bathroom mirrors always are at 5 in the morning. She studied her face the way she studied everything, without flinching, without softening the image. Jaw tight, eyes clear, a small scar along her left collarbone from a fall she'd taken at 9 years old, chasing something she couldn't remember anymore. She'd stopped trying to remember. Today was the interview. Not just any interview. The interview. Voss Industries. 42nd floor of a building that made other buildings feel inadequate. The kind of company whose name you didn't Google because you already knew the answer. The Voss family had been woven into the economic fabric of New York for 3 generations, and their wealth was the kind that didn't flash, didn't advertise, and didn't apologize. She'd been headhunted. An email from a recruiter named Catherine Hale, terse and precise, 2 weeks ago. 3 rounds of interviews already completed, each more surgical than the last. Today was the final conversation, with Damien Voss himself. She ironed her blazer with the focused concentration of a surgeon. Dark navy, clean lines. She'd bought it 4 years ago and kept it preserved like evidence. She wasn't trying to look expensive. She was trying to look like she belonged in a room where the furniture cost more than her car, and she'd learned a long time ago that belonging wasn't about matching the room. It was about refusing to let the room make you small. The subway was crowded and hot, and smelled like burnt coffee and wet rubber. A man with a briefcase pressed into her shoulder without acknowledging her. She shifted her weight and pulled out her phone, reviewing the notes she'd compiled on Damien Voss. 41 years old, Harvard MBA, public face of Voss Industries since his father's health decline 18 months ago. Photographed at every charity event worth attending, quoted in the Times 3 times in the last year. He had the kind of profile that looked deliberately constructed, every sentence calibrated, every image chosen. She'd noticed that. She'd also noticed that in none of those photographs was his older brother, Adrian Voss, present. She filed that away. The Voss Industries lobby was exactly what she expected, and nothing she was prepared for. The ceilings were obscenely high. The floors were pale stone that reflected light like still water. 2 security guards in dark suits tracked her movement the second she stepped through the revolving door, and she felt the particular kind of surveillance that money buys. Quiet, invisible, total. "Nia Holloway," she told the receptionist. 10 o'clock with Mr. Voss. The receptionist smiled with her mouth. "He's expecting you. 42nd floor. Someone will meet you at the elevator." That someone was a woman named Priya, mid-20s, moving with the precise efficiency of a person who had been trained to never waste emotion. She didn't offer small talk. She escorted Nia down a corridor lined with abstract art that cost more than Nia's entire building, pressed the elevator button, and said, "He likes when people are direct. Don't over-explain. Nia looked at her. Is that advice or a warning? Priya's expression didn't change. Both. The elevator opened. Priya stayed behind. Nia rode up alone. Damien Voss was standing when she entered, which surprised her. Men like him usually performed the power move of staying seated. He was tall, lean in the way that suggested discipline rather than genetics, with dark hair worn slightly long and the kind of face that photographers loved. Angular, symmetrical, carrying just enough imperfection in the jaw to seem human. He extended his hand before she reached his desk. Miss Holloway. His voice was the warmest thing in the room. Mr. Voss? He gestured toward the chairs across from his desk, then sat himself, leaning back in a way that managed to look both relaxed and entirely in control. The office was floor-to-ceiling glass on two sides. New York spread beneath them like a map of something he already owned. I've read your file 3 times, he said. I don't read files 3 times. Then you already know what I'm going to tell you. He smiled. It reached his eyes, which she noted carefully, because smiles that don't reach the eyes are one thing, but smiles that do can mean something worse. They can mean someone is genuinely pleased with themselves. I do, but I'd rather hear it from you. Why do you want this position? It was the question every interviewer thought was insightful, and every candidate had rehearsed 17 versions of. She'd rehearsed 0. I don't want the position, she said. I want to be useful to something that matters. If this is it, then the position is a side effect. He studied her for exactly 4 seconds. She counted. What if I told you the last 3 people who sat in that chair couldn't handle the pressure? I'd ask you to define pressure. Another silence. He leaned forward this time. I need someone who can move in rooms where they won't be taken seriously at first glance. Someone who can absorb information without reacting. Someone who is, frankly, underestimated, and can use that. He paused. I imagine that's not a new concept for you. The sentence landed precisely where he intended it to. She felt it, the small electric shock of being seen and used in the same breath. She didn't blink. No, she said. It's not. He offered her the job before she left the building. She should have asked more questions. She knew it even then, riding the elevator back down through the 42 floors of glass and stone, the offer letter already being emailed to her account. She knew the way you know when a street is too quiet, when an apology comes too fast, when someone is generous with you before you've earned it. She knew it, and she took the job anyway, because the salary was real, and the opportunity was real, and Nia Holloway had not survived everything she'd survived by waiting for perfect circumstances. The first 3 weeks were a controlled flood. She was handed access codes, standing meeting invitations, encrypted communication protocols, and a private work phone that she was told to use exclusively for Voss communications. She received a wardrobe consultation, subtle. Damien framed it as a company perk, never once suggesting her clothes were inadequate, but she understood the choreography and began appearing at his side during meetings with the kind of seamless integration that takes most assistants 6 months to achieve. She was good at this. That was the uncomplicated truth. She absorbed information at a pace that surprised even her, learned the internal architecture of Voss Industries' 12 subsidiaries in 2 weeks, and developed an instinct for which board members were afraid of Damien and which ones merely performed deference. There was a difference. She cataloged it. Damien noticed. He always noticed. You remembered Hartwell's wife's name, he said one afternoon, after a negotiation lunch where she'd made a passing, unrehearsed remark to the CFO's spouse about a gallery showing the woman had mentioned 6 days earlier in a brief corridor exchange. Nobody remembers Hartwell's wife's name. Hartwell barely remembers Hartwell's wife's name. It costs nothing to pay attention, Nia said. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't categorize cleanly. Not attraction, not exactly. Something more acquisitive, like a man who'd just discovered a tool he hadn't known he needed. No, he said slowly. It doesn't. The gift started in week 4. Small at first, a book on organizational psychology left on her desk with a handwritten note, a coffee service upgrade for her office, which she hadn't asked for, a pair of tickets to a Lincoln Center performance slipped into an envelope with a card that said simply, "You work too hard. Take someone who makes you laugh." She brought her cousin Keisha, who spent the entire performance eating contraband chips from her purse and whispering commentary about the violinists, which was exactly the right call. She noted the gifts. She noted the escalation pattern. She said thank you with warmth and no reciprocation, which was a deliberate choice, and he never pushed back on it, which was itself a kind of data. On a Thursday evening in her 5th week, Damien asked her to stay late to review materials for an upcoming board presentation. This was not unusual. What was unusual was the quality of the silence in the office after the rest of the staff had cleared out. A heavier silence, more deliberate, like the building itself was holding its breath. She was reviewing a financial projection on her screen when he appeared in her doorway with 2 cups of coffee. "You eat dinner?" he asked. "Usually. There's a place around the corner. The owner owes me a reservation." He said it without pressure, without performance. Just a man in a doorway holding 2 coffees. She closed her laptop. "Give me 10 minutes." They ate at a small Italian restaurant where the lighting was low and the menu had no prices. And Damien talked about his father for the first time. Not the public version, not the patriarch of a dynasty, but an old man who could no longer remember the names of his grandchildren and who sometimes stood at the window of the estate in White Plains for hours without speaking. He talked about it plainly, without seeking sympathy, and Nia found herself listening in the particular way she listened when something felt true. "He built something real," Damien said, turning his wine glass slowly. "Everything else around it. That's what happens when you build something real. Things attach themselves. Things you didn't plan for." He looked at her. "You understand what I mean. I understand that the thing you build and the things that attach to it aren't always the same thing," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "Exactly right." The estate invitation came 3 days later. "A family dinner," he said. "Informal." The word informal in that context was almost funny. She'd done enough research on the Voss estate in White Plains to know that their idea of informal involved staff and a catering team and a dining room that seated 24. She told herself she was going because it was professionally appropriate. She told herself she was not going because she was curious, or because part of her had started to feel the particular gravitational pull of a man who paid attention to her in a way most people in her life never had. She told herself a lot of things on the drive up to White Plains in the car Damien sent for her, and by the time the estate appeared at the end of a long private road lined with old oaks, its white stone facade lit softly against the October evening, every window warm, she had almost believed herself. The dinner table was exactly what she'd calculated. Polished, cold beneath the warmth, crystal and candles and conversation that moved like chess. Damien's mother, Eleanor, was gracious with the precise grace of a woman who had been performing graciousness for 50 years and had long since stopped distinguishing it from sincerity. 2 cousins whose names she memorized immediately. A family attorney who was not introduced as a family attorney. And at the far end of the table, largely quiet, watching her with the focused patience of a man who was deciding something, Adrian Voss. He was older than Damien by 6 years. Where Damien was magnetic and polished, Adrian had the worn quality of someone who had stood too close to heat for too long. His face held a tiredness that wasn't fatigue. It was knowledge, the kind that doesn't leave. He spoke to her only once during dinner, briefly, asking about her background with the careful courtesy of someone making an assessment rather than conversation. She answered evenly. He nodded once and went quiet again. After dessert, while Damien was cornered by the family attorney near the fireplace, Nia stepped into the corridor to find a restroom. The corridor was long and dim, portraits of Voss men going back 3 generations lining the walls like a gallery of accumulated consequence. Adrian was standing at the far end. He didn't look surprised to see her. He'd been waiting. "Ms. Holloway." His voice was low, calibrated for a conversation that didn't want to be overheard. She walked toward him slowly. "Mr. Voss?" He looked past her, toward the dining room, then back. Up close, she could see that the tiredness in his face wasn't just knowledge. It was guilt. Old guilt. The kind that had calcified around the edges and become part of the bone structure. "I'm not going to pretend this is a casual hallway conversation," he said. "Good. I'm not in the mood for pretending." He looked at her directly then, the full weight of it, nothing deflected. "You're working for the wrong man." The sentence sat between them in the dim corridor like a physical object. She didn't answer immediately. She studied him. His hands were still. His breathing was controlled. He wasn't performing. This was what a person looked like when they were telling the truth and hated having to. "That's a significant thing to say about your brother," she said finally. "Yes," he said, "it is." He held her gaze for another 3 seconds, then straightened. "Enjoy the rest of your evening." He moved past her toward the far wing of the estate without another word, without looking back. Nia stood alone in the corridor beneath the painted eyes of 3 generations of Voss men and felt, for the first time in 5 weeks, the specific kind of cold that has nothing to do with temperature. She returned to the dining room. Damien caught her eye immediately from across the room and smiled, warm, easy, certain. She smiled back. On the drive home, the city lights appearing through the car window as white planes gave way to the highway, gave way to the Bronx, gave way to Brooklyn. She thought about Adrian's face. Not his words. His face. The face of a man who had done something he could not undo and had chosen to warn a stranger rather than stay silent. She thought about the 2 questions she hadn't asked him. What exactly was the wrong man capable of? And what had happened to the women who'd come before her? She did not sleep that night. She sat at her kitchen table with her laptop and a yellow legal pad, and she began, quietly and methodically, to look. What she started to find made her stomach drop slowly, the way an elevator does when the cable tension shifts. Not a sudden fall, but the terrible, deliberate awareness that the ground is no longer where you thought it was. By the time the sun came up over Flatbush, Nia Holloway had stopped looking for reassurance. She had started looking for exits. She found the first name at 6:14 in the morning. Celeste Marin, 29 years old. Former executive assistant to Damien Voss, employed for 11 months, terminated, according to a single line in a LinkedIn ghost profile that hadn't been updated in 3 years, for personal reasons. No forwarding contact, no professional references listed, no trail after October of that year, except a brief mention in a Westchester County missing persons report that had been quietly closed 8 months later with the notation, "Insufficient evidence to pursue." Nia stared at the screen until the words stopped being words and became something else. A shape. A pattern. She wrote the name on her legal pad and underlined it once. Then she searched for the second name because she already understood, in the cold functional part of her brain, that emotion hadn't reached yet, that there would be a second name. It took her 40 minutes to find her. Renata Solis, 32. Also an executive assistant. Also attached to Voss Industries in a peripheral capacity, not listed as Damien's direct assistant, but showing up in the background of 2 archived press photos from a corporate charity gala 3 years ago, standing 2 steps behind him with the specific posture of someone whose job is to be present without being visible. After the gala, nothing. Her Facebook page still existed, frozen in time. The last post a photo of her cat and a half-eaten plate of arroz con pollo captioned "Sunday Energy," posted 4 years ago. Her sister had left 3 comments beneath it over the following year, each one shorter than the last. The final one said only, "Renata, please call me." Nia closed the laptop. She sat in the kitchen of her Flatbush apartment and listened to the radiator and the upstairs neighbor and the bus at the corner of Nostrand and Linden, and she understood that the sounds she'd relied on her whole life to anchor her were not going to be enough this morning. The ground was not where she'd left it. The ground had been moving under her for 5 weeks, and she hadn't felt it because she hadn't wanted to. She pressed both hands flat on the table, breathed in through her nose, out through her mouth, once, twice. A third time that didn't help. Then she picked up her pen and kept writing. She arrived at Voss Industries at her normal time, 8:45, because showing up late or early when you're frightened is how frightened people get caught. She went through security with her badge, exchanged good mornings with the lobby staff, took the elevator to 42, and sat down at her desk like a woman who had slept. Damien arrived at 9:15, jacket over one arm, moving with the unhurried confidence of a man for whom the world reliably arranges itself. He stopped at her doorway. "You look tired," he said. "Bad radiator night," she said without looking up from her screen. "You should let me put you somewhere closer to the office. There are residential units in the building on 56th. I'm fine in Flatbush." A pause. She could feel him reading the pause, calibrating it. "All right," he said finally, easy, unbothered. "I need the Hargrove file and the Tuesday projections on my desk by 11. "Already there?" He smiled. Of course they are. He disappeared into his office, and she listened to his door close, and she kept her eyes on her screen, and her hands were completely still, which cost her something she couldn't measure. The morning passed in the specific torture of normalcy. Calls to route, schedules to manage, a catering confirmation for the following week's board luncheon. She did all of it with her usual precision and a portion of her brain that was entirely elsewhere, running calculations, building maps, tracing the architecture of something she was only beginning to understand the dimensions of. At noon, her personal phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Can you meet? Not at the building. Riverside Park, 79th Street entrance. 1 p.m. She stared at it. Then she typed back, "How do I know who this is?" The response was immediate. "You already know. That's why you're scared." She told Damien's assistant she was stepping out for a lunch errand. Nobody questioned executive assistants who moved with purpose. That was something she'd understood since her first corporate job at 23. Purpose is its own permission. The October air hit her in the face the moment she stepped outside, cold and sharp, and carrying the smell of the river. She walked the 12 blocks to Riverside Park at a pace that wasn't hurried but wasn't human either. The kind of walking that happens when your body is trying to outrun something your legs can't actually reach. Adrian Voss was already there. He was sitting on a bench facing the river with his hands between his knees, wearing a dark overcoat that looked like it cost significantly less than everything else about him, which she registered as deliberate. He wasn't dressed like a Voss today. He was dressed like a man trying not to be one. She sat beside him without preamble. The river moved below them, gray and indifferent. "Celeste Marin," she said. His jaw tightened. "You move fast." "Renata Solis." He looked at the river. His throat moved. "Yes." "What happened to them?" It wasn't a question. He understood that. Celeste figured out that Damien had been routing subsidiary funds through accounts she'd authorized, co-signing, essentially, without understanding what she was co-signing. When she confronted him, he told her it was a mistake, a miscommunication, that he would handle it. 2 weeks later, she was gone. He paused. The official story is she left voluntarily. She left a note. The family lawyer handled everything quickly. And Renata? Renata went to an outside attorney. He finally turned to look at her. His eyes were dry and exhausted in the way of a man who'd used up his capacity for tears a long time ago. She had documents, real ones. The attorney contacted the company the next day with concerns about retaining the case. 3 days after that, Renata's sister couldn't reach her. Nia kept her face neutral, which was the hardest thing she'd done in years. The missing persons case was closed. The detective assigned to it had a mortgage refinanced at a very favorable rate through a Voss subsidiary lending arm 6 weeks after he filed the closure report. The river went on moving. A dog barked somewhere behind them. "He's doing the same thing to me," she said. It was not a realization. It was a confirmation. She'd known it since the drive home last night, since the names on the screen, since the very first moment in the interview when Damien had said, underestimated, and watched her face with those warm, reaching eyes. "He's further along with you than he was with them," Adrian said. "You're more valuable. You're more credible. You appear in more rooms." He stopped. "There are documents already in preparation, Nia. I don't have them, but I know they exist. By the time he's ready to use them, your name will be on enough transactions that any investigator who looks at the record will see you, not him." She breathed, in, out. The cold came in with the air and didn't leave. "Why are you telling me this?" she said. Why not go to someone yourself?" The question landed on him visibly. His shoulders dropped a fraction. "Because I have been complicit in things I cannot walk away from cleanly. Because my father—" He stopped, recalibrated. "Because going to law enforcement with what I know costs me everything and still might not be enough. But you—" He looked at her directly. "You have nothing dirty on you yet. You're still clean. If you move now—" "If I move now and run, I look guilty." "Yes. And if I stay, you become what he needs you to be." She stood up. The bench was cold through her coat, and her back ached in the specific way that comes from a night of not sleeping and spending 2 hours hunched over a laptop looking for dead women. She walked to the railing at the edge of the park and looked at the Hudson. A barge moved slowly north against the current, making it look effortless, which she knew it was not. "I need everything you have," she said. "Every document, every account number, every name." Adrian stood. "If I give you that and Damien finds out—" "I know." She turned around. "I'm not asking you to protect me. I'm asking you to give me what I need to protect myself." She looked at him with the full force of everything she'd built and carried and refused to surrender over 34 years. "Can you do that?" He held her gaze for a long time. Wind off the river moved between them. "Give me 48 hours, he said. She nodded once. Then she turned and walked back toward the city. She was at her desk by 1:47. The next 2 weeks were the most technically demanding of her professional life, which was not a small statement. She worked on 2 levels simultaneously. On the surface, the consummate executive assistant, flawless and indispensable, the woman Damien was molding into the public face of his ascension. Beneath the surface, a woman building a case file with the focused patience of someone who understands that panic is a luxury she cannot afford. Adrian delivered the first package through a legal courier to her home address, mislabeled as a subscription renewal for a professional journal she actually subscribed to. Inside was a USB drive containing 4 years of encrypted financial records, routing documentation, and a series of internal memos that had been deliberately kept off the company's main server. She read everything twice, then a third time, then began constructing a timeline on paper. Physical paper, no cloud backup, that she kept in a locked metal box she'd bought at a hardware store in cash. What she found in those files was not what she'd expected, which is to say it was worse. Voss Industries' legal business was substantial and real. The problem was the architecture built beneath it, a series of shell companies routed through 3 offshore jurisdictions, feeding back into legitimate Voss subsidiaries as consulting fees and strategic partnership disbursements. The money itself was laundered so cleanly that, on first examination, it looked like competent tax strategy. But the origin accounts, when traced back through 4 layers of corporate structure, connected to a network of municipal contracts that the Voss family had been winning in New York, in New Jersey, in 2 Connecticut counties, through a pattern of bid manipulation that spanned 22 years. 22 years, starting under the father, continued and expanded by Damien. She found the names of 4 city officials, a state senator, 2 federal procurement contacts, a judge. She sat with that last one for a very long time. Meanwhile, Damien was accelerating. He began including her in meetings she had no official reason to attend, executive sessions, private briefings with the family's banking contacts, a closed-door session with 2 men she'd never seen before, who were introduced only by first names and who watched her with the flat professional attention of people whose job was assessment. Afterward, Damien told her the men were international partners and that her presence had been specifically requested because they wanted to understand the operational capacity of his inner team. She smiled and said she was glad to be useful, and went back to her office and wrote down both men's faces in words as precisely as she could, enough detail to reconstruct them later. Damien also began, subtly and with elegant indirection, shifting authorization language. Small changes. A signature line added here. An amended standing authorization there. All presented as administrative streamlining, which, in a company the size of Voss Industries, it would have been easy to accept as routine. She accepted it as routine to his face. On her private paper timeline, she documented every single change with the date, the document reference, and the context in which it was presented to her. He was building the frame. She was photographing it while it was being built. The second package from Adrian arrived 10 days after the first. This one shook her. It was a single document, a draft, watermarked confidential in faded ink, dated 5 weeks from the current date. It was a prepared statement from Voss Industries' legal department, addressed to the office of the New York State Attorney General, voluntarily disclosing financial irregularities and cooperating with an investigation. The statement named Nia Holloway, executive personal assistant, as the primary individual responsible for the unauthorized transactions, describing her as having operated independently and without the knowledge of senior leadership. It described her as having exploited her position of trust. It used the phrase deliberate and sustained deception in the 3rd paragraph. It was detailed. It was sourced. It cited document numbers that she recognized, documents she had co-signed or processed in her first weeks when she hadn't known what she was processing. It was almost complete. She held the document in her kitchen for 11 minutes without moving. Then she placed it in the metal box, locked it, and called Adrian. "The statement," she said when he picked up. "I know." His voice was rough. "How long?" "If the current timeline holds, 5 weeks, maybe 6. He's waiting for the board vote. Once he's officially CEO, he files the disclosure. He looks like a man of integrity who uncovered a crime inside his own company. And I'm the crime." Silence. "Adrian?" She kept her voice flat and even. "Is there anything else I should know before I decide what I'm doing? Anything at all?" The silence on the line stretched long enough that she knew what was coming before it came. "There's a third woman," he said. "Before Celeste. Her name was Josephine Park. She worked for my father, not Damien, but Damien was 26 when she disappeared, and he was the last person who saw her." He stopped. "It was ruled accidental. My father paid for the funeral. The radiator in her apartment knocked once, hard like a fist." "Okay," Nia said. "Nia." "Okay," she said again. "I'll be in touch." She ended the call. She didn't cry. She hadn't cried since her grandmother's funeral 6 years ago, and she wasn't going to start tonight over a man who had looked her in the eye across a restaurant table and talked about his father like a man with a conscience. While somewhere in a law office, his attorneys were typing her name into a document that would end her life as she knew it. She was angry. The anger was clean and cold and very, very useful. The next morning, she walked into Voss Industries and she sat down at her desk and she began, with the patience of a woman who had always done twice the work for half the credit and was therefore twice as prepared for this as anyone who'd underestimated her could have anticipated. She began building the other file. Not the one that documented what Damien had done. She already had that. The one that documented what she was going to do about it. It was in the 3rd week of this double life, on a Tuesday that had started with a forecast of rain and delivered instead a cold gray sky that couldn't commit, that Damien called her into his office and closed the door and said, without sitting down, "I want you to be the public presenter at the leadership ceremony." She looked at him. "The announcement event, December 14th. When the board confirms the transition, I want you at the podium. You'll speak on behalf of the executive team, introduce the transition, establish the tone." He leaned against the edge of his desk. "This is the moment, Nia. You've earned it." She held the eye contact, held it past comfortable, past polite, into the territory where most people looked away. He didn't. She'd known he wouldn't. "That's a significant responsibility," she said, "for a significant person." He tilted his head slightly. "You understand what it means, right? Standing in that room. Representing this company, everything you've built here." She understood exactly what it meant. The room would be full of politicians, board members, investors, judges. Her face would be on every camera. Her name would be on the podium. And somewhere in the legal department, 5 floors below, a document with her name on it was waiting. He was giving her the frame and asking her to walk into it herself. She smiled. Warm, certain. The smile of a woman who was exactly where she wanted to be. "I'd be honored," she said. He looked pleased in a way that made her stomach turn precisely once, and then she locked that reaction somewhere he would never find it. She went back to her desk. She picked up her personal phone and sent a message to Adrian. "December 14th. I need everything before then. No more waiting." His response came in 4 minutes. "Understood. There's someone you need to meet. She worked for the company 8 years ago. She got out. She kept records." Nia read the message twice, then she typed, "Set it up." She set her phone face down on the desk and looked out the window at the gray sky that still couldn't decide what it wanted to do. And she thought about Celeste Marin and Renata Solis and Josephine Park, 3 women whose names had been erased with the specific efficiency of people who had the money and the lawyers and the judges to make erasure look like coincidence. She thought about the statement in the metal box. Deliberate and sustained deception. Her name, her signature, her reputation, constructed over 8 years of twice the work and half the credit, being used as the surface of a crime she had not committed. And she understood, with the cold clarity of a woman who had stopped sleeping and started planning, that she was standing at the exact point where every choice behind her had closed, and only one choice remained open in front of her. She could not run. Running was guilt. She could not wait. Waiting was the frame closing around her. She could not trust the system. The system had a judge on its payroll. There was only one direction left, and it went straight through the middle of everything Damien Voss had built, and it required her to walk back into that building every single day and smile and perform and collect and prepare, while a man who had already decided to destroy her stood close enough that she could hear him breathe. She had accepted the job because she was good at being underestimated. Now she was going to use it. Outside the window, the gray sky finally made its decision. It began to rain. The woman's name was Gloria Reyes, and she opened her apartment door in the Inwood neighborhood of Upper Manhattan, wearing reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and an expression that said she'd been expecting this conversation for 8 years and was exhausted by the fact that it had finally arrived. She was 51, small and compact, with the kind of stillness that comes from having survived something and choosing every day afterward to remain standing. She worked now as a paralegal at a nonprofit housing advocacy firm 4 blocks from her apartment. She had a daughter in college in Philadelphia. Adrian had told Nia on the phone the night before, kept every document she'd taken from Voss Industries in a fireproof safe under her bed, because she'd known someday someone would need them, and she hadn't trusted herself to throw them away. Nia sat at Gloria's kitchen table and did not touch the coffee Gloria placed in front of her, because her hands were unsteady enough that she didn't trust the cup. "How much do you know?" Gloria said. She sat across from her and removed the reading glasses from her forehead and placed them on the table between them like she was setting down a weapon she didn't need. "Enough to know I'm not the first," Nia said, "and enough to know that if I don't move in the next 3 weeks, I become the last." Gloria looked at her for a long moment. Her face did not perform sympathy. It did something harder and more useful. It recognized. "He was 28 when I worked for the father," Gloria said. "Damien, he wasn't running anything officially. He was learning, watching how his father operated, his father was a different kind of machine. Quieter, more patient." She turned her coffee cup in both hands. But Damien always had the same instinct, even then. He found people who were trying to prove something, people who needed the opportunity more than they needed to be careful. "Big bus." She paused. "Women like us. We work harder because we have to. We don't ask questions because we're afraid questions make us look ungrateful." He knew that. He used it like a formula. Nia's jaw tightened. "What did he do to you?" "He made me the co-signatory on a series of disbursement accounts I was told were for legitimate vendor payments. I processed them for 8 months. When I finally requested full documentation on one of the vendors, just routine, just doing my job, he called me into his office and told me there had been a compliance review and that my authorization patterns had raised concerns." She said it without visible emotion, the way people repeat sentences they've rehearsed by necessity until the feeling has worn off the words. "He told me that to avoid a formal investigation, the cleanest path was a quiet resignation with a sealed settlement. I had a daughter who was 9 years old and a mother in a care facility in Queens. I signed. The settlement included a non-disclosure, comprehensive, and a clawback clause that would have required me to return the settlement payment and face civil litigation if I violated it." She looked at Nia directly. "Which means what I'm telling you right now, this conversation, could cost me everything I have." The kitchen was very quiet. "Then why?" Nia started. "Because Renata Solis used to text me," Gloria said. "Not often, but sometimes. She'd found my name somewhere, an old company directory, and she reached out 3 years ago to ask if I'd ever felt like something was wrong. We talked twice. The second time was 2 weeks before she disappeared." She pressed her lips together. "I am done being quiet about what quiet costs." Nia reached across the table and took the coffee cup and made herself drink. It was too hot. She held the heat in her mouth for a second before swallowing. "I need your records," she said. "I know. And I need your testimony. Not now, not yet. But when the time comes, I need you ready to speak." Gloria was quiet for a moment. Then she stood, went to the back hallway, and returned carrying a gray metal box, smaller than the one under Nia's own bed, older, the corners worn soft with time. She set it on the table between them. "I've been ready for 8 years," she said. "I just needed someone to open the door." Nia took the box. She rode the subway back to Brooklyn with the box on her lap, and her hands flat on its surface, and her eyes on the floor of the car. A teenager across from her was watching something on his phone with headphones on, nodding to music she couldn't hear. Two elderly women were talking in Haitian Creole about someone's son-in-law with the particular tone of profound disappointment that transcends language. Normal sounds, normal world. The box on her lap contained 8 years of Gloria Reyes's careful, frightened documentation, and nobody on this train knew it. And that gap between the visible world and the actual world was something Nia had been living in for weeks now, and the gap was getting wider every day. She got home at 9:47. She opened both boxes, Gloria's and her own, and spent 3 hours cross-referencing. The documents aligned in ways that were almost perfect, which meant they were real, because fabricated evidence tends toward a neatness that reality never quite achieves. Real evidence has gaps and inconsistencies that nonetheless connect, like a broken bone that heals slightly wrong but is still clearly one bone. By 1 in the morning, she had a master file. Digital, encrypted, backed up to a drive that was not in her apartment. She had also photographed every physical document with her personal phone on a separate encrypted cloud account under a name that was not her name. She was building a wall, brick by brick, in the dark, while the man who planned to use her as a scapegoat smiled at her across board tables and called her indispensable. She was 3 weeks out from December 14th when the first thing went wrong. It was a Wednesday, 4:30 in the afternoon, and she was at her desk when Priya, Damien's scheduling coordinator, appeared in her doorway with an expression that was trying very hard to be neutral and failing in the specific way of someone delivering bad news they'd been told not to deliver with emotion. "He wants to see you," Priya said. Now, not unusual in itself. But Priya's hands were slightly clasped in front of her, which was not her normal posture, and she didn't make eye contact when she said it, which was also not normal. Nia saved her work with one keystroke, stood, straightened her jacket, and walked to Damien's office. He was not alone. There was a man she'd never seen before sitting in one of the chairs across from Damien's desk, late 40s, heavy through the shoulders, wearing a suit that was expensive but not tailored, which made him look like someone who'd recently acquired money rather than grown up near it. He had a stillness that was different from Gloria's. Gloria's stillness was the stillness of survival. This was the stillness of a man who did things and then waited to see what happened. Damien gestured to the second chair. "Sit down, Nia." She sat. Her spine was straight. Her hands were in her lap. Her face was clear. "This is Marcus Hale," Damien said. "He oversees internal security for the company." She looked at Marcus Hale. He looked at her with the flat professional attention she'd seen in the two men at the earlier meeting, the men who'd been introduced only by first names. She understood with a drop of cold through her chest that this was one of those men. Different suit, same eyes. "Marcus has been conducting a routine security review of our executive communications," Damien said. He kept his voice warm, his posture open, nothing in his presentation suggesting anything other than a routine administrative matter. "As we approach the leadership transition, we've been conducting enhanced monitoring of all internal systems." He paused. "It's standard." "Of course," she said. "We've identified some unusual access patterns on the company network," Marcus said. His voice was flat, without regional accent, the kind of voice that belonged to a man who'd trained it not to reveal where he was from. "Searches made outside normal workflow parameters. Document access that doesn't align with authorized job functions." The silence that followed was 2 seconds long. She counted every fraction of it. "Can you tell me what you're referring to specifically?" she said. Not defensive, curious. The tone of a professional who expects to clear up a misunderstanding. Marcus opened a folder on his lap and read off 3 document reference numbers. She recognized 2 of them. They were documents she'd accessed in her first weeks, legitimately within the scope of her actual job function, but which she now knew were part of the financial architecture Damien was preparing to blame on her. The 3rd document number she didn't recognize at all, which meant either it was fabricated or someone else had accessed it under her credentials. She kept her face exactly where it was. "Those are all documents I accessed in the course of normal executive coordination," she said. "The Hargrove file, the subsidiary restructuring overview, and..." She looked at Marcus. "I'm not recognizing the 3rd reference number. Can you show me the document?" A beat. Marcus looked at Damien. Damien looked at her with his warm, terrible eyes. "Of course," he said. "We can pull that up. This isn't an accusation, Nia. This is just due diligence. You understand that? Completely, she said. She went back to her desk and she sat down and she breathed through her nose 4 times, and then she opened her screen and she looked at nothing visible, and she thought with absolute precision about what had just happened. They were testing her. The meeting was a calibration. They wanted to see how she reacted, whether she'd go pale, whether her hands would shake, whether she'd ask for a lawyer or make a call on her work phone that she shouldn't. They were watching to see if she knew she was compromised. She'd given them nothing. But the fact that they were running this test now 3 weeks early meant the timeline had accelerated. Either something had triggered it, or Damien was moving up December 14th, or her personal phone buzzed in her jacket pocket. She kept her face forward, finished what she was typing on her work screen, then stood and walked calmly to the women's bathroom on the 42nd floor, which she had confirmed 3 weeks earlier had no surveillance equipment, because she had checked every corner of it with a camera lens detector she'd ordered online and paid for in cash. She locked the stall and looked at her phone. The message was from Adrian. It said, "Don't come to the office tomorrow. Don't contact me on this number again. I'm sorry." She read it 3 times. Then she called him. It rang once and went to a full voicemail box. She called again. Same. She stood in the locked bathroom stall of the 42nd floor of Voss Industries and felt something she had been refusing to feel for 3 weeks move through her like water through a crack in stone. The cold spreading possibility that the one person on the inside who'd been helping her had just stepped back into the dark. She did not panic. Panic in a bathroom stall on the 42nd floor would be the end of everything. Instead, she cataloged what she knew in the same way she'd cataloged everything since the night she'd found Celeste Marine's name. Systematically, without mercy, without sentimentality. Adrian had sent the packages. Adrian had connected her with Gloria. Adrian had given her the document with her name on it. Adrian knew the timeline and the names and the structure of the case she was building. Adrian also had a family, a mother, an inheritance, however complicated, a history of complicity that made him as legally exposed as Damien if the right document surfaced. She had trusted him because he was the one who'd warned her. She had forgotten that warning someone and protecting someone are not the same transaction. She left the bathroom. She returned to her desk. She worked until 6:30, said goodnight to the 2 remaining staff members on the floor, took the elevator down, and walked out into the cold November evening with her bag over her shoulder and her face arranged into the expression of a woman going home after a long day. She walked 3 blocks north, turned west, turned north again, and then stopped in the doorway of a closed dry cleaning shop and took out her personal phone and checked for surveillance. She had developed this habit in week 2 without ever consciously deciding to. The body learns paranoia faster than the mind admits needing it. She called Gloria. Gloria picked up on the second ring. "Adrian's gone dark," Nia said. A silence. Then, "How dark?" "I don't know yet. But they ran a test on me today at the office. Someone accessed something under my credentials that I didn't access. They're building faster than I thought." "Do they know about me?" Nia thought about it honestly, which was the only way she knew how to think. "I don't know. Adrian knew about you. If he's told them, then the box I gave you is evidence they can argue was fabricated or stolen," Gloria said. Her voice was steady, which Nia noted and did not take for granted. "My non-disclosure becomes a weapon they can use to discredit anything I say." "Yes. So we have 3 weeks and we have potentially lost our inside source, and the opposing legal team may already know I exist." "Yes." A very long pause. "Okay," Gloria said. "Okay. I said I was done being quiet." Her voice didn't waver. "I meant it. What do you need me to do?" Nia pressed her back against the cold brick of the dry cleaning shop doorway and looked up at the slice of November sky between the buildings. Dark and starless. The kind of New York night where the clouds hold all the city's light and give none of it back. "I need you to find somewhere else to stay tonight," Nia said. "Take the box. Don't go home first. Is there someone you trust?" "My sister in the Bronx." "Go there. Don't use your regular route. Pay cash for anything you buy on the way." A beat. "You think it's that serious?" "I think Renata Solis thought it wasn't that serious," Nia said. "Right up until it was." She heard Gloria's breath change on the line. Not fear exactly, the sound of a decision being made. I'll call you when I get there, Gloria said. Nia ended the call and walked the rest of the way home through streets she'd known her whole life, past the bodega where the owner knew her order, past the laundromat where she'd spent Saturday morning since she was 12, past the church she'd stopped attending at 19 but whose steps she still climbed sometimes in bad weather to wait for buses. Brooklyn surrounded her like a language she'd grown up speaking, and it had never felt less like protection. She climbed the stairs to her apartment and unlocked the door and went inside and stood in the kitchen for a moment in the dark before turning on the light because she needed that one moment, one of allowing herself to feel the full weight of where she was. Adrian was gone. The timeline was accelerated. Her credentials had been used to access documents she'd never seen. Somewhere in this city, Damien Voss was sleeping without difficulty, because men like Damien Voss always slept, because the mechanism of what they were doing was so far removed from their daily reality that it registered not as crime but as administration. She turned the light on. She made coffee. She sat at the table. She opened her laptop and her legal pad, and she looked at everything she had: Gloria's records, Adrian's files, her own timeline, the photographs, the encrypted drives, and she accepted with the full cold weight of clarity that it was not enough. It was not enough because without Adrian's testimony, the inside narrative was gone. She had documents, but no one to authenticate the chain of custody from inside the company. She had Gloria, but Gloria had a non-disclosure and a history of receiving a settlement that could be framed as participation. She had a timeline, but timelines without a cooperating witness were arguments, not evidence. She needed something that couldn't be discredited, something that existed independently of documents that could be called stolen, witnesses that could be called compromised, and records that could be called fabricated. She needed Damien's own voice. She sat with that for a long time, turning it over the way you turn over something with sharp edges, carefully, aware of what it could do to you. Getting Damien on record saying what he intended to do was not a passive exercise. It required access. It required proximity. It required her to walk back into that building and get closer to him than she had allowed herself to get since the night she'd found the names, and it required her to do it knowing that the security apparatus had already started watching her. It required her to become exactly what he thought she was: loyal, trusting, grateful, and to use that performance as a weapon while wearing a wire in a building full of people whose job was to find exactly that. If it failed, if they found the device, if she gave herself away, if Marcus Hale was better at his job than she needed him to be, there would be no second attempt. There would be a story about a disgruntled employee who'd stolen documents and attempted to entrap a CEO, and the attorneys would have the filed disclosure ready within hours, and her name would be processed through a system where a judge they owned would handle the arraignment. She knew all of this. She accounted for all of it. Then she picked up her pen and began writing the next phase. Because Nia Holloway had not survived 34 years of being underestimated by waiting for the conditions to be favorable. She'd survived by moving when everyone around her assumed she was standing still. She was going to get him on record, and the only way to do it was to make Damien Voss believe, completely and without reservation, that she had finally become exactly what he'd spent months shaping her to be. A woman so grateful for the opportunity, so invested in his vision, so thoroughly inside the frame he'd built for her, that she would never in 1,000 years think to burn it down. She wrote until 3 a.m. Outside, the city moved through its own machinery, indifferent and constant, and somewhere in White Plains a man slept in a house built on 22 years of buried things. And he did not know that the woman he had chosen for her credibility and her competence and her long practice of surviving rooms that didn't want her was sitting at a kitchen table in Flatbush, mapping the exact dimensions of his destruction. He did not know it yet. But in 6 days, when he called her into his office to discuss the December 14th ceremony in detail, when he leaned close to show her the program, when he said her name with the warmth of a man who had already decided what she was for, she was going to be ready. What Damien Voss had never understood, and what men like him never understood, was the specific and terrible patience of a woman who had always had to be twice as good, and was therefore, at this particular moment, twice as dangerous as anything he had planned for. He'd built a trap. She was about to walk into it wearing the key. 6 days passed like held breath. Nia went to work. She answered emails. She confirmed catering for the December 14th ceremony, reviewed the guest list, 240 names, politicians and judges and board members and international investors, and coordinated with the event production team about podium placement and microphone setup with the focused attention of a woman who cared deeply about the logistics and not at all about what she was actually building inside them. She had found the device on day 2, not a surveillance device, her own. A directional audio recorder, no larger than a thumb drive, with 12 hours of battery life and transmission capability to an encrypted receiver she kept in the locked drawer of her desk at home. She'd ordered it through a third-party electronics vendor, paid with a prepaid card, had it shipped to Gloria's sister's address in the Bronx. She'd worn it taped to the inside of her left forearm twice already, once during a routine morning briefing, once during a catering walkthrough of the Grand Vos ballroom where the ceremony would be held, testing the audio quality, testing her own ability to move and speak and breathe and perform normalcy while the thing pressed against her skin like a second pulse. The audio was clean. Her performance was cleaner. Damien called her into his office on day 6 at 11 in the morning. The office was bright with winter light, the city below them cold and clear. He was standing at the window when she came in, which was unusual. Damien almost never stood at the window. That was a pose for men who were uncertain. He was looking at something she couldn't see from the doorway. "Close the door," he said. She closed it. "Sit down." She sat. The recorder was on her forearm. The tape held. She could feel her own heartbeat in her wrists, which she noted with the detached interest of a woman monitoring her own systems. He turned around. His face was different. Not dramatically. Damien Vos didn't do dramatic shifts. His control was too thorough for that. But the warmth was dialed back by precisely the amount that made everything feel different. What was left was not cold, exactly. It was careful. The face of a man making a final assessment. "I need to talk to you about the ceremony," he said. "Of course." He moved to his desk but didn't sit. He stood behind it with both hands resting on the surface, looking at her with the patience of a man who had all the time in the world, which was its own kind of threat. "The board has moved the vote up," he said. "December 9th instead of the 14th. Her chest tightened. 5 days. That's a significant change. "The chairman has a health situation. It's better to move." He paused. "The ceremony stays on the 14th, but the legal and financial transitions will be complete before that, which means by the time you stand at that podium, the company will already be mine." She kept her face where it was. "Does that change my role?" "It simplifies it." He came around the desk and sat on its edge, closer to her now, the body language of intimacy and also of physical dominance, the deliberate reduction of formal distance. Once the transition documents are executed on the 9th, there are some additional filings that will go through your authorization channel. Routine. But I want you to understand that the window will be narrow and I need you available that entire day. Authorization channel. She translated that in real time. The documents he'd been preparing for months, the ones that would put her name on enough transactions to constitute a pattern of fraud, were going to be executed in a 5-day window before the ceremony, before she ever stood at the podium, before she could reach the room full of cameras. The timeline had not just accelerated, it had been restructured entirely. He wasn't waiting for the ceremony to crown himself and then file the disclosure. He was completing the financial transfer first, securing his position legally, and then the ceremony was merely theater, her standing at his podium as the already framed scapegoat, her face on every camera in the room, her name in the program, her voice on the microphones. She needed the recording before December 9th. She had 3 days. "I'll be available," she said. He smiled. Warm again, the warmth returning like a light being turned back on. "Good. I knew I could count on you." He reached across and briefly, deliberately, placed his hand over hers on the arm of the chair. "This is the moment, Nia. Everything you've worked for." His hand was warm and dry. Hers was warm and absolutely still. "I know," she said. She looked at him with the full performance of a woman who believed that. She looked at him with 8 weeks of practice and a lifetime of being underestimated by men who thought they understood what they were looking at. He held the eye contact for 2 seconds longer than necessary. Then he straightened and went back behind his desk, and the meeting was over, and she walked out of his office and down the hallway and into the women's bathroom, the same stall, third from the left. And she checked the recorder and the audio was clear, and she had everything he just said, every word. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. Not enough. She needed him to say what he intended to do. She needed him to say it plainly, the way people say plain things when they believe they are completely safe. She had to make him feel that safe in the next 3 days. While the whole machine tightened around her, she texted Gloria from the stall. Timeline moved to December 9th. 3 days. I need the room. Gloria responded in 90 seconds. My contact at the FBI field office. I reached out last week without telling you because I needed to know if they were real. They are. One agent. She's been building a Voss Industries file for 14 months. She needs primary source audio. Nia stared at the screen. An FBI agent. 14 months. A file that existed before Nia had ever walked into this building. A federal investigation that had been moving in the dark the same way she'd been moving in the dark, and they'd been parallel lines without knowing it. She typed, Name, Special Agent Dana Kwan. She wants to meet tonight. Nia put her phone away, walked back to her desk, sat down, pulled up the ceremony venue layout on her computer because she had a legitimate reason to have it open and because she needed something in front of her eyes while her mind ran calculations. An FBI file meant federal jurisdiction. Federal jurisdiction meant a judge they owned at the state level was irrelevant. It meant the disclosure document Damien planned to file became evidence of obstruction rather than exculpatory. It meant everything she'd collected, Gloria's records, Adrian's files, her timeline, had a place to go that was larger than she'd been planning to take it. It also meant that the recording she needed was not just evidence for a room full of cameras on December 14th. It was evidence for a federal case. She had to get it right. She met Dana Kwan at a diner in Astoria at 8 that evening. The agent was 38, Korean American, wearing civilian clothes that didn't quite disguise the posture of a person who had been trained to stand so that their back was always to a wall. She had a cup of coffee she wasn't drinking and a contained watchfulness that Nia recognized because she'd been wearing a version of the same expression for 3 weeks. They looked at each other across a Formica table for a moment before either spoke. Gloria says you have documentation, Kwan said. I have the inside records Adrian Voss passed to me, cross-referenced with 8 years of Gloria Reyes's records, and a timeline of my own credential use that demonstrates I was being set up from week 1. She paused. I also have 6 weeks of being inside that building, and I know every room, every authorization channel, every name on the board, and the exact mechanism of the fraud. What I need is his voice, Kwan said, on record, specifically authorizing the cover story, specifically placing your name on the transactions with intent. She held Nia's gaze. The documents are important. The documents plus audio is a federal case. I know. Nia put both hands flat on the table. I have 3 days. Kwan was quiet for a moment. What's your plan? He trusts me. He thinks he has complete control of the frame. In the next 3 days, he's going to want to brief me on what I'm supposed to understand about the December 9th filings. He needs me to authorize smoothly, without hesitation, which means he'll walk me through it, at least partially. That briefing is where he'll expose himself. She stopped. I need to create the right conditions for that conversation to happen privately, in his office, without his security advisor in the building. Ba? Marcus Hale. Yes. Kwan nodded once. Hale is former private intelligence. He has counterintelligence training, and he's been conducting sweeps of the executive floor twice weekly. If you're wearing a device, I've already worn it twice in that building without detection. Kwan looked at her steadily. This is different from a test run. If he finds it, I know what happens if he finds it. A pause. You understand we can't protect you inside that building, Kwan said. It wasn't an apology. It was the clean delivery of an operational truth by someone who'd learned the cost of overpromising. We can have agents outside. We can respond. But inside in real time, I'm on my own. Nia held her gaze. That's not new. Something moved across Kwan's face. Not quite admiration, more like the recognition of a specific kind of toughness that doesn't announce itself. There's one more thing, Kwan said. She opened the bag on the seat beside her and placed a small evidence envelope on the table. Inside it, visible through the clear plastic, was a photograph. Printed, not digital. A man in a parking garage. This is Adrian Voss, 2 nights ago, meeting with Damien's head of legal affairs. Nia looked at the photograph. The cold she'd felt when Adrian's messages went dark arrived again, settling into a specific shape. He told them, she said. We don't know how much. He told them about Gloria, about the records. She thought about it with the precision of someone calculating structural damage. He may have told them about the FBI contact. If he told them about me, Damien knows we have a file. Kwan's voice was even, which changes his timeline in ways we can't fully predict. He moves faster, Nia said. He executes the September 9th filings early. He gets his authorization signatures before I know what I'm signing. She pressed her fingers against the table edge. Or he removes me from the equation entirely before December 9th. The word removes sat between them. Kwan picked up the evidence envelope and put it back in her bag. I need you to make a decision tonight. If you're in, we move the operation to tomorrow. I have 2 agents I can position in the building as a service vendor. There's a maintenance window on 42 that our team can access legitimately. She paused. But I need your answer now, tonight. Because if Adrian has told Damien about this conversation, our window is already... I'm in, Nia said. No hesitation, no performance, just the word. Kwan nodded. She slid a burner phone across the table. This number only. Single-use protocol. Call once, burn it. I'll send a tech to your apartment at 6 tomorrow morning for the equipment. Nia picked up the phone. What kind of equipment? Something smaller than what you've been using, and more defensible in court. They left the diner separately, 3 minutes apart, and Niall walked to the subway through the December cold and did not look behind her more than twice, which was a form of discipline because every instinct she had was telling her to run, and she was choosing, very deliberately, not to listen to that instinct. She did not sleep. At 6 in the morning, a woman arrived at her door, identifying herself as a contractor and carrying a toolbox. She was inside for 11 minutes. When she left, Nia had a device no larger than a shirt button that was integrated into the fabric of the jacket she'd already planned to wear, with a transmission range of 200 meters and audio capture sensitive enough to pick up a conversation across a standard office room. She wore the jacket to work. The morning passed in controlled agony. Every email was normal. Every interaction was normal. Marcus Hale walked the floor at 10:15 in his routine pattern, and she watched him move through her peripheral vision without turning her head, and she breathed at a deliberate rate, and her hands did not shake. At 11:47, Damien appeared at her door. Can you come in for a few minutes? He said. I want to walk you through the 9th filing sequence. She picked up her notepad. She followed him into his office. He closed the door. This was it. This was the room. Somewhere in the building, 2 FBI agents were positioned, and the transmission was live, and Dana Kwan was in a vehicle on the street below with headphones on. And all of it, every week of double life, every sleepless night, every name written on a legal pad, every brick of the wall she'd built in the dark, came down to the next 20 minutes in this room with this man and what she could make him say. He sat across from her, not behind the desk this time. In the chairs, the informal arrangement, the arrangement that said trust. He had a folder on his knee, and he was relaxed in the way that made her understand he believed he had already won. The 9th is going to move fast, he said. I want you comfortable with the sequence. Walk me through it, she said. He opened the folder. He began explaining the filing structure. The language careful, the specifics present enough to be operational but framed as administrative. She listened and she nodded and she asked clarifying questions that were exactly the right questions. The questions of a woman who was paying attention and wanted to do her job correctly. And every question she asked was calibrated to move him slightly further into specificity, to pull the language from the careful frame of administrative briefing into something plainer, something that said what it actually meant. It took 14 minutes. At minute 14, when she asked, quietly, with the tone of a woman who just wanted to make sure she understood the full picture so she could support him correctly. And the authorization filings on the 9th, those are the ones that establish my role as the operational signatory going back to month 1? He looked at her with his warm, certain eyes and said, without hesitation, without a single flicker of doubt, because he believed she was his, completely and finally his, yes. And if there's ever any question afterward about the accounts, about the transactions, All roads lead to your signature. That's the design. You're the story the investigators find when they look. He paused. Not because you're guilty, but because you're the most credible person in the room. That's why I chose you. The room was absolutely silent. Nia held his gaze. She did not look at the jacket. She did not look at the window. She did not look anywhere except directly into the eyes of a man who had just, in complete confidence, described the exact mechanism of a federal crime in a room with a live transmission and 2 agents in the building and 1 more in a vehicle on the street below. I understand, she said. And she did. He reached forward and closed the folder. Good, I knew you'd understand. He smiled. You always do. She stood. She gathered her notepad. She walked to the door and put her hand on the handle, and then she stopped, because Damien said her name. Nia. In a tone she hadn't heard before. Not warm, not certain. Something underneath the certainty. Something that had shifted by a fraction in the last 30 seconds. Some animal instinct in a man who had survived by reading rooms. She turned around. He was looking at her. The warmth was still there, but the calculation beneath it had surfaced, just barely, like an edge showing through fabric. You're ready for the 14th, he said. It was half statement, half question, and the question underneath it was not about the ceremony. She looked at him with everything she had, every week of practice. Every morning she'd sat across from him and smiled. Every ounce of the particular strength that comes from being underestimated so long that invisibility becomes armor. I've never been more ready for anything in my life, she said. She turned and walked out of his office and down the hallway past the abstract art that cost more than her building and into the elevator, and she pressed the lobby button and she stood with her back straight and her face forward, and she waited for the doors to close. The moment they did, she pressed her hand flat against the elevator wall and leaned her weight into it and breathed. One breath, raw and ragged and completely private, the only one she was going to allow herself. Because she had it. She had his voice. She had the words. And in 4 floors, she was going to walk out of this building and call 1 number on a burner phone and say 2 words, and the machinery that had been moving in the dark for 14 months was going to become visible. And December 9th was going to look nothing like what Damien Voss had planned. And every name on her legal pad was going to mean something finally. Celeste and Renata and Josephine and Gloria, and every woman who had sat in that chair and been used and discarded and erased was going to mean something. And the elevator stopped. Not the lobby. The 38th floor. The doors opened. Marcus Hale stepped in. He looked at her. She looked at him. The doors closed behind him and the elevator resumed its descent, and the 2 of them stood in the small, bright box of it with 4 floors between them and the lobby and Marcus Hale's flat. Professional eyes moved from her face to her jacket and back to her face, and something in his expression shifted by the exact fraction that meant he already knew, had already been told, had come for precisely this moment. And his hand moved toward the elevator panel and pressed the button that stopped the car between floors, and the elevator lurched to a halt, and he turned to face her fully in the sudden stillness and said, in a voice with no warmth and no performance, and nothing in it except the cold efficiency of a man who was very good at his work, I'm going to need you to take off the jacket. The elevator hung between floors like a held breath. Marcus Hale stood between her and the panel. 4 feet of space that was not space at all. It was a wall with a man attached to it. His hand was still near the controls. His eyes had not moved from her face, which told her he was professionally trained, because amateurs look at the thing they want. Professionals look at the person who might stop them from getting it. The jacket, he said again. Nia did not move. She stood with her back 3 inches from the elevator wall, and she looked at Marcus Hale, and she made herself breathe at a rate that was not the rate her body was requesting, which was much faster, and she thought with absolute clarity about what was actually happening in this box, and what her options were, and how many of them there were. There was one. Why? She said. Ms. Holloway. Where's... I'm asking you a professional question. Her voice was flat, not afraid, not defiant. Flat. The way concrete is flat, giving nothing. On what authority are you detaining me? In an elevator, between floors. What is the legal basis for this conversation? Something moved behind his eyes. Not uncertainty. He wasn't uncertain, but the acknowledgement that she'd named something real. He was not law enforcement. He was private security. What he was doing in this elevator was not an arrest. It was a threat, dressed in the language of procedure. "I'm asking you to cooperate with a company security review," he said. "I am not company property," she said. "I am an employee who is currently leaving the building at the end of a meeting. You have stopped an elevator I am legally entitled to ride. If you touch me without my consent or without a law enforcement officer present, I will have your license, your employer's license, and every contract Voss Industries holds with your firm in front of a federal judge before the week is out." She held his gaze without blinking. "Now open this elevator." He looked at her for 4 full seconds. Then his phone buzzed. He glanced at it. A single flash of his eyes downward, less than a second, but enough. She saw his jaw set. He reached past her and pressed the lobby button. The elevator resumed its descent. Neither of them spoke for the remaining 30 seconds. When the doors opened, Nia walked out without hurrying, crossed the lobby at her normal pace, nodded to the security desk the same way she'd nodded to it every day for 8 weeks, and walked through the revolving door into the December cold. She made it 12 steps from the building before her legs stopped cooperating correctly. She kept moving. She didn't stop. She crossed the street and turned north and put one foot in front of the other with the mechanical insistence of a woman who understood that stopping was not an option, and her heart was doing something in her chest that was too fast and too loud, and she could feel her own pulse in her ears, in her fingertips, in the scar along her left collarbone that had never meant anything until right now when it meant that she was alive and standing and still moving. She reached the corner and she pressed herself against the side of a building and took out the burner phone and called the number. Kwan picked up before the first ring completed. "We have it," Kwan said. "All of it. Clear audio. I need you to walk to the corner of 54th and 10th. There's a gray sedan. Don't run." "He's going to call Damien," Nia said. Her voice came out steady, which surprised her. "He already has. We're monitoring. Walk." She walked. The gray sedan was exactly where Kwan said it would be. She got in the back. Kwan was in the passenger seat, turned around to face her, wearing the expression of someone managing the distance between relief and the next urgent problem. "You're okay," Kwan said. It wasn't a question. It was information, delivered to a woman who needed to hear it stated plainly. "I'm okay," Nia said. "The audio is clean. We have him authorizing the frame by name, describing the mechanism, placing intent explicitly. That's the evidentiary threshold." Kwan paused. "We're moving on the 9th, not waiting for the ceremony. The 9th is 3 days. 2 now. We've requested emergency authorization. Given what we have, plus the existing file, the U.S. Attorney's Office is ready to move." She looked at Nia directly. "I need you somewhere safe tonight, not your apartment." "Gloria, already arranged. She's been moved to a federal safe house in Jersey as of this afternoon." Kwan's voice didn't change register when she delivered information like this. Each fact placed like a brick, level, and without drama. "There's one more thing you should know. Adrian Voss contacted our office this morning, independently." Nia was quiet. "He says he wants to cooperate fully. He's recanting his meeting with Damien's attorneys. He says Damien's legal team threatened his mother, specifically her medical situation." Kwan watched her face. "I don't know if you believe that." Nia thought about Adrian at the park bench, hands between his knees, the calcified guilt in his face. The voice of a man who had been carrying something for a long time and hadn't decided yet whether he was strong enough to put it down. "I believe he's afraid," she said. "Whether he's useful is your call." Kwan nodded once. "Fair." They drove through the December streets of Manhattan, and Nia looked out the window at the city she'd grown up in. The one she'd ridden the subway through at 17, trying to figure out how to be the first person in her family with a college degree. The one she'd walked through at 23 in shoes that hurt because she couldn't afford better ones, and she wasn't going to show up to her first corporate job looking like she couldn't afford better ones. The one she'd moved through for 34 years, doing everything twice as well, and waiting for the world to eventually catch up to what she already knew about herself. She looked at it and felt something she hadn't expected. Not triumph, not yet. Something quieter. The specific exhaustion of a woman who has been holding herself together by will alone for long enough that when the pressure finally changes, the body doesn't know what to do with the difference. She let herself be tired for exactly the length of the drive. Then they arrived at a nondescript building in a nondescript block in a nondescript part of New Jersey, That was exactly the kind of place designed to look like nowhere. And she got out of the car, and she went inside, and she slept for 6 hours without dreaming, which was the most merciful thing that had happened to her in 2 months. December 9th arrived gray and cold. She was not at Voss Industries. She was in the federal building on St. Andrews Plaza at 7 in the morning in a conference room with Kwon and 2 assistant U.S. attorneys and a woman from the Financial Crimes Unit who'd been building the numbers side of the Voss case for 11 months and who looked at Naya's timeline and her cross-referenced documents with the expression of someone seeing a map of territory they already knew from the air, but had never walked on the ground. "This fills every gap," the financial crimes attorney said. She was 40-something, precise. Wearing reading glasses she kept taking off and putting back on. The shell company routing, the municipal bid manipulation. We had the architecture. We couldn't prove the internal authorization chain. This completes it. They spent 4 hours going through everything. Nia walked them through each document, each cross-reference, each entry on the timeline, answering every question with the precision of someone who had memorized the material, not because she'd been told to, but because her life had required it. By 11 in the morning, the U.S. attorneys had enough for the warrant package they'd been assembling. At 12:47 in the afternoon, federal arrest warrants were issued for Damien Voss, Marcus Hale, 3 Voss Industries executives, the family's primary outside counsel, 2 of the municipal officials named in the bid manipulation records, and a state court judge. At 2:15, federal agents entered Voss Industries. Nia was not there for that part. She was in the conference room when Kwon walked in and said, "It's done," and set a bottle of water on the table in front of her because Nia's hands were shaking for the first time in 2 months, and Kwon was a practical woman who understood that the body waits until safety to come apart. She drank the water, her hands steadied. She pressed them flat on the table and breathed. "Damien," she said, "taken into custody at the Voss estate in White Plains. He was there with his attorneys when the agents arrived." Kwon sat across from her. He didn't resist. Apparently, he was very calm. She had expected that. Men like Damien didn't resist arrest because they didn't believe, right up until the handcuffs, that it was actually happening. Their certainty was structural. It held even when the building was falling. His attorneys filed an emergency motion within the hour, Kwon continued. Standard. They'll argue suppression on the audio, challenge the search warrants, attempt to discredit your authorization chain. She paused. They'll also attempt to use the original disclosure document, the one naming you, as a preemptive filing. Can they? They can try. The disclosure document itself is now evidence of conspiracy to obstruct. Filing it at this point, Kwon allowed herself a small, dry expression that wasn't quite a smile, is not their strongest legal strategy. Nia sat with that. "Gloria," she said. "Safe. She's already been interviewed by our financial crimes team. Her records, combined with yours and the corroborating material from Adrian Voss's cooperation, establish a 26-year pattern." Kwon's voice gentled by a fraction. "She's going to have to testify. There will be a process to navigate her NDA through the court, but the U.S. Attorney's Office is prepared to support her." "She'll do it," Nia said. She said it without hesitation because she'd sat across from Gloria Reyes at a kitchen table in Inwood, and she understood the specific courage of a woman who had been quiet for 8 years and had decided she was done. Adrian Voss testified before a federal grand jury on December 11th. Nia was not in the room for that either. She heard the account of it secondhand from Kwon, in the same conference room that had become, over the course of 3 days, something close to a second home: the institutional carpet, the long table, the window that looked at a brick wall. Adrian had recounted the full history, his father's construction of the criminal network beginning in the late 90s, his own peripheral involvement, the knowledge he'd carried and chosen not to act on, the years of complicity by omission. Damien's expansion of the operation after taking operational control 6 years ago. Josephine Park, whose death Adrian confirmed had not been accidental, and whose case he named Damien as responsible for in a statement that was, Kwon said, delivered without apparent emotion in the same tone a man might use to read a list of figures. "He's going to prison too," Kwon said. "His cooperation will be considered, but the exposure is real." "I know," Nia said. She didn't feel what she thought she'd feel about that. She'd expected something cleaner. Vindication, maybe, or anger completing itself. What she felt instead was tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. The exhaustion of a woman who'd spent 2 months caring intensely about the mechanics of justice and was now beginning to understand that justice, when it arrives, does not fill the shape of what was taken. Celeste Morin had not been found. The investigators were not optimistic. Renata Solis' sisters was contacted by federal investigators on December 10th. She had not heard her sister's name spoken in an official capacity in 3 years. Kwan told Nia that the sister had been silent on the phone for a long moment before she said quietly, "I knew it wasn't nothing." Those 4 words. Nia sat with those 4 words for a long time. The December 14th ceremony happened. Nobody canceled it. The U.S. Attorney's Office, in a decision Nia learned about through Kwan with a feeling she couldn't name cleanly, decided the event should proceed as scheduled, not as a celebration, as a controlled public disclosure. The board of Voss Industries, most of whom were in various states of legal exposure, were present. The investors and politicians and judges who'd received invitations, some of whom were themselves under investigation, were present. The cameras were there. Nia was there. She hadn't planned to be. She'd thought, after December 9th, that she would simply not appear, that the ceremony would become someone else's moment, some federal spokesperson or U.S. attorney standing at the podium that had been built for her. She'd thought she was done with that room. But Gloria had called her the evening of the 13th, from the safe house, then from her sister's apartment in the Bronx, where she'd returned the night before. She'd called and said without preamble, "Are you going tomorrow?" "No," Nia said. "You should go." Gloria, "Not for him. Not for the case. Not for any of it." A pause. "For you, for Renata, for Josephine, for the women who are going to see a black woman walk into that room and tell the truth in front of every camera in New York City." Her voice was not sentimental. It was factual. "You don't have to speak. Just be there." Nia thought about it for a long time after the call ended. Then she ironed the dark navy blazer, the one she'd bought 4 years ago and kept preserved like evidence. She hung it on the back of her chair and she went to bed, and in the morning she put it on. The Grand Voss ballroom was exactly as she'd coordinated it. The flowers, the lighting, the podium placement, every logistical detail she'd managed with the focused competence of a woman building the trap she was going to use to bring down the man who'd built it. Standing in it now, in the morning before the room filled, she felt the particular strangeness of a place that had been planned for one story and was now hosting a completely different one. A U.S. attorney named Richard Park, no relation to Josephine, a coincidence that Nia noted with the quiet irony of a woman who had spent 2 months in the machinery of coincidence, spoke at the podium for 20 minutes. He described the scope of the investigation with the measured language of federal law, citing the financial crimes, the bid manipulation, the obstruction. He named Damien Voss. He named the others. He described the evidence. Nia stood at the back of the room when the cameras found her, and they did because one reporter from the Times had done enough research to put her face in context. She did not look away. She stood with her back straight and her hands at her sides and her face holding the expression of a woman who had something to say and was choosing, at this moment, the specific authority of silence. She was asked afterward to make a statement. Several reporters. She declined. She declined with warmth, without hostility. In the same way she'd spent 8 weeks declining every implicit invitation to be smaller than she was, simply and without apology. She did give one interview. 3 weeks later, to a journalist named Camille Okafor, who wrote for a publication that covered corporate accountability and who had been reporting on Voss Industries' municipal contracts for 2 years without enough evidence to publish. They sat across from each other in a coffee shop in Park Slope and talked for 2 hours, and when the piece ran, it was 6,000 words long, and it named Celeste, Maureen and Renata Solis and Josephine Park, and it named Gloria Reyes. Not as a victim, but as a woman who had kept records for 8 years because she understood that silence has a price, and she had decided the price was too high. The piece was read by a lot of people. It was shared by more. It generated the specific kind of attention that makes institutions uncomfortable, which was its purpose. Damien Voss was indicted on 23 federal counts. His attorneys were good, which Nia had anticipated. The trial would take time. Justice, in the federal system, is a slow machine with metal teeth, and she'd learned enough about its mechanics over the preceding months to harbor no illusions about its elegance. But the machine was moving, and the evidence was real, and the audio was clean. She knew what the outcome would be. 3 months after December 14th, Adrian Voss received a plea agreement. 18 months in a federal facility, credit for cooperation, restitution payments to the municipal jurisdictions affected by the bid manipulation scheme. He would lose the inheritance. He would lose most of what he'd spent his life being adjacent to. He would keep his freedom, in the reduced and specific sense available to a man who had spent 47 years complicit in things he couldn't undo. He sent her a letter, handwritten, 3 paragraphs. She read it once at her kitchen table in Flatbush, in the morning, with coffee. The letter did not ask for forgiveness. It did not explain or justify. It said only that he had been a coward for a long time, and that watching her do what he had been unable to do had cost him in a way he hadn't expected, and that he hoped she was all right. She folded the letter and put it in the metal box, which now held nothing dangerous. The evidence was in federal hands. The drives were with Kwan's office, but which she'd kept because she'd developed a relationship with its weight and wasn't ready to let it go yet. She did not write back. She thought about writing back for several weeks and decided that the letter had said what it needed to say, and she had heard it, and that was its own kind of exchange. And some things don't require the formal closing of a response to be complete. What she did, in the months that followed, was work. Not for Voss Industries, which was under federal receivership and being systematically dismantled by people whose job was the careful disassembly of things built wrong. She worked on something she'd been circling in her mind since the night she'd sat at her kitchen table looking at the records of women who'd been chosen for their competence and credibility and then used as disposable infrastructure. She registered the nonprofit in February. She named it plainly, without inspiration or ornamentation, because she was done with things that looked better than they were. The Holloway Leadership Institute. Its mission was straightforward: mentorship, professional development, legal literacy, and corporate navigation skills for women, specifically women who moved through professional spaces that weren't designed for them, specifically women who had been underestimated so long they'd begun to internalize the estimate. Gloria Reyes became the director of legal programming. She commuted from Inwood twice a week and ran workshops on documentation, NDA literacy, and employment law with the focused precision of a woman who'd spent 8 years wishing someone had given her this information before she needed it. The first cohort was 22 women. The second was 41. By the end of the first year, there was a waiting list. Nia ran the institute from an office in a building in downtown Brooklyn, 4 blocks from the subway she'd ridden her whole life. The office had good light and a wall that she didn't decorate for 3 months because she couldn't figure out what she wanted to put on it. And then one morning she came in and there was a package on her desk from Camille Okafor, the journalist, and inside was a framed photograph from the December 14th ceremony. Not of Naya, of the room. The wide shot, from the back, every camera and every face, the podium empty, the ballroom full, the particular charged stillness of a moment before something irreversible. She hung it on the wall, not as a trophy, as a document, so that every woman who sat across from her desk would see it and understand that the rooms that don't want you are not the end of the story. They are only the part of the story that comes before the part where you decide what you're actually made of. On a Thursday evening in early spring, she was the last one in the office. She was going through the following week's schedule: 3 new intake sessions, a legal workshop, a panel on corporate documentation practices that Gloria had organized and Nia was going to moderate, when she heard the notification on her personal phone. Federal Court, Southern District of New York. Damien Voss. Guilty on 19 of 23 counts. Sentencing in 60 days. She read the notification twice. Then she set the phone down on her desk. Through the office window, the light was doing the particular thing that spring light does in Brooklyn in the late afternoon, coming in at an angle that caught the dust in the air and made it briefly visible. All those small particles of ordinary life, floating in something that looked for just a moment like gold. She looked at the wall, the photograph, the room full of cameras and the empty podium and the 240 faces of people who had gathered to celebrate a man and found themselves instead inside the collapse of everything he'd built. She thought about Celeste Marie, who had still not been found, whose name the investigators said might never have a complete answer attached to it, and that absence, The specific, unresolvable absence of a woman reduced to a name on a legal pad was something Nia had made a private agreement with herself about, that she would carry it without letting it be only grief, that she would let it be fuel of a different kind, the kind that does not consume but sustains. She thought about Renata Solis, whose sister had sent her a message 3 months after the indictment, a short message, only a few lines, saying that for the first time in years she'd been able to talk about her sister in public, in front of other people, without the conversation dying the way it had always died before. And that this was something, it was not everything, but it was something, and she wanted Nia to know. She thought about Josephine Park, 26 years ago, standing in a corridor of the Voss estate and not knowing yet what she was standing in the middle of. She thought about all the things that might have been different if someone had handed Josephine a piece of paper and said, "Here is what to document, here is who to call, here is what your name is worth and how to protect it." She thought about her grandmother's kitchen in Flatbush, the morning she'd come home with her college acceptance letter, and the way her grandmother had looked at it for a long time without speaking, and then said, in a voice that was not soft, "Now don't let them make you think this is the thing you owe them for." She'd been 17 and she hadn't fully understood it. She understood it now. The acceptance is not the debt. The excellence is not the apology. The presence in the room is not the permission they grant. It is the thing you carried there yourself, at whatever cost. And it was yours the whole time. She stood from her desk. She straightened the chair. She put on her coat, not the navy blazer, a different coat, a long winter coat in charcoal gray that she'd bought for herself in January with the specific intention of buying herself something good without waiting for an occasion. She turned off the office light. In the darkness, the photograph on the wall was a pale rectangle. The room, the people, the empty podium, just barely visible in the light coming through the window from the street below. She locked the door. She walked down the stairs and out of the building and onto the sidewalk where Brooklyn moved around her in the particular register of a spring evening. The kids on bikes, the bodega owner sitting on a milk crate with his phone, the couple arguing about something that sounded domestic and alive, the smell of someone's dinner coming from an open window 3 floors up. She walked toward the subway. She was 34 years old. She had a master's degree from Fordham. She had a scar on her collarbone and a metal box in her apartment, and a wall covered with letters from women whose lives had changed because she had chosen, at the exact moment when everything could have broken, to go forward instead of back. She had been chosen because she was credible, because she was competent, because she was the kind of woman who could be placed inside a crime and made to look like its author rather than its target. They had been right about all of it. They had only been wrong about one thing. They had thought that what made her valuable to them made her controllable. They hadn't understood. Men like Damien Voss never understood, because understanding it would require them to see the full weight of what they were looking at, that the same competence they'd wanted to use against her was the exact thing that had undone them. She had been underestimated her entire life. She had a lifetime of practice at working inside that underestimation, moving through it, building inside it the things that could not be taken. She went down the subway stairs. The train came. She got on. The doors closed. The city moved past the windows, tile and dark, and then light, and then dark again. And then the particular brightness of a station she'd known since she was a child, and she stood holding the overhead bar with one hand and looking at nothing in particular, and feeling, for the first time in longer than she could accurately measure, the specific quiet of a woman who has done the thing that needed doing and is now simply on her way home. The empire built on lies had fallen. And the woman everyone had underestimated was standing on a Brooklyn-bound train at the end of a Thursday in spring, tired in the good way, the earned way, the way that comes after. She was going home. She was still here. That was enough. That was, in fact, everything.